Hey, Nam.
What's good, guys?
It is time for a project that I've been wanting to do, along with our previous video. If you haven't seen it yet, please check out our casting episode for the Jetsons. It's really fun. You get to hear us talk about the casting of all the characters did. But enough about that. We're going back into space again. We're going to talk about a movie series that's been going on since the 70s to now, and that's the Star Wars. As you can see, Nam and I are pretty much Star Wars fans. I don't think I'm like the biggest like up in the sky kind of like Star Wars fan, but I enjoy the movies. I enjoy the universe. I enjoy the stories. I enjoy the games and all that kind of stuff. And I know you enjoy them also. And I guess the question is like, what drew us to liking Star Wars in general? And I think what drew me into it was, one, the special effects at the time were really beautiful. It's the first time that kind of like, that space opera, space drama happened. The fact that you have this new way of people with powers that are the Jedis and Sith Lords coming together and whatnot. And just more of the lore of these creative characters that just expand even further than the movies into books, fan fiction, all this kind of stuff that people can just dive into this world and just learn so much about it. Nom?
Jeremy said fan fiction.
There's a lot of fan fiction. There's a lot.
Well, first off, let me preface this so that people who are watching can understand where we're coming from. We are fans of the movies. We're not diehards. We are very casual fans of the movies. And I can speak for myself. Jeremy can speak for himself here. But I'm not going to sit there and be able to tell you that I've read all the graphic novels or I read any of the books. Really strictly just movie based and some of the cartoons that I've watched, Star Wars, and just kind of what I've learned through like Disney Plus and from my friends that talk about it. So as far as that's concerned, what drew me into Star Wars is the lightsabers, man. It's cool. Like swords, laser swords. Like being able to do laser swords and having a little bit of superhero powers. I think that was one of the biggest things, right? Because for us growing up, it feels like there wasn't this. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. For us growing up, it feels like this was few and far between when it comes to like superhero movies or superhero like style like aspects. And they're not really superheroes, but they're humans with the ability to control the force, right? So there was that thing of, it's like, I can be that. It's like, I can't be Superman, right? I can't be the Flash. It'd be kind of cool. But, for people that deal with Star Wars, is like, these are like people, like normal people who may be force sensitive or not force sensitive, and it has a wide variety. So I thought it was kind of unique. The laser swords is what brought me in first. The cool laser effects, even though a lot of misses were there. Mm-hmm. Darth Vader, and the fact that it was kind of like cool. It's like normal people with powers. I can get into it. That's the reason why I got into Star Wars. Jeremy, what was the reason you got into it?
Well, I think a lot of people like you, I agree, like with the sabers, of course, and everything. I'm a big sci-fi person, so I thought the visuals were like the thing that pulled me in, because I think it's one of the fewer movies that I remember being when I was young that was a lot of space. And the fact that this movie definitely influenced a lot of sci-fi films that tried to almost mimic some of the Star Wars aspects of it. And that drew me into watching more of those kind of films too. But I think it was just the fact that Darth Vader was a big influence, because he was at the time this mysterious, scary guy that like you just never knew how powerful this guy was, right? And they built him up so much that it felt like it was Vader first, then the Empire, and then you find out that Vader is an underling, not so much the leader. So it's like it's even more crazy of where this story goes, and the fact that you find out later on it is more of like a family drama among the Skywalkers and whatnot. And of course we learned that later on with the previous movies that were 1, 2, and 3, which at the time you're watching, at the time those movies came out, they were considered 4, 5, and 6. That is, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And then in the 90s, we get, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and The Revenge of the Sith, right? And we start learning those backstories, what led to Darth Vader. That became very interesting. And the fact that I think now, looking now at those 1, 2, and 3s, that they kind of age a lot better than I thought they would. I thought they were going to age pretty bad. But I think now with, the way that the new Star Wars that we'll go further in later about have come, 1, 2, and 3 can kind of come a little bit more appreciated. There's still some errors. There's still some mistakes in there I don't really like, but I still enjoy. I go back and now I enjoy them. But one of the number one things for me was you forget how long the Star Wars movies are. They feel longer every time I watch them. So, but yeah, that's what drew me to Star Wars. It was just something you've never seen before at the time. Well,
I gotcha. So, like you were talking about, let's talk about the series. Just a quick tidbit of how we feel about the series. Of course, for me, 4, 5, and 6, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and those are the classics, right? Those are the reason why we got into watching Star Wars. And for me, it's hard, right? Because when you look at the next 2 trilogies after that, it's hard. It's like when you play a video game or listen or watch an anime or something, it's like the first thing you see is generally the one that you have the most loyalty to. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's the better story as well. Mm-hmm. So I deeply enjoyed those movies. The journey that we had with Leia, with Han, with Luke, and then the twist of finding out that Vader is Luke's father. Like all those, you can't really beat the original classic or the original trilogy, mm-hmm. in my opinion. Jeremy, you feel the same way?
Yeah, I feel the same way. On top of that, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think mainly the characters really stood out. Every character really had a moment. They were really cool. There wasn't really too many lame characters per se. Every character had a mystery about them. Even your main character, like Luke, still had a little mystery about him. Han Solo definitely had a mystery about him. Layla, Darth Vader, the most. And the movie did a good job of leaving these breadcrumbs that want you to keep following into the next movie, because one of the things that they took a chance on was leaving these cliffhangers with these unanswered questions and hoping that it'll pay off for the next one if they got enough money to the next one. As you can see, it paid off in their favor. And you could definitely tell also too with the classic ones is definitely the practical effects and the stuff they had to do to pull off the visual looks and everything was really cool, especially the costumes. They had some of the most iconic costumes that you can ever think of in like a sci-fi movie. And just the fact of like the robotic stuff they had to do, the mechanics and everything like that. It was very impressive of some of the ideas that they put in there. They even said that some of the influence came, like, for instance, like Flash Gordon for some of the character developments and all that kind of stuff. So I always really like just the visual and the imagination of where the characters go. And then the story, of course, is this whole mystery of, it's not just a war going on. It's also a mystery of finding out why these characters are important for this war. And why do we need to care about these characters as they travel to do these missions and everything.
No, I agree. And then the next trilogy was more whenever Jeremy and I were teenagers in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And of course that starts with the Phantom Menace and so forth and so on. The thing about it is that we were so excited, and I think that was the biggest thing. There was such an excitement that George Lucas was like, all right, we're going to make another trilogy that's going to be based on Darth Vader's rise to power, or rise just in general. So I think there was such a general excitement, we kind of overlooked things, or at least most people did. But if you want to talk about length, Jeremy hits it on the dot right here, right now. These trilogies felt so long. I mean, it was like an hour pod race, like for real.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I did enjoy these three, retrospectively looking at it, the series itself got all right. So the trilogy, that particular trilogy, got better as it went on, but the series itself, trilogy to trilogy, to me felt like it was slowly starting to get worse. And that's when a lot of us were like, I think George Lucas has lost the faith. He's not true to his thing, and it just, whether it was a combination of it trying to be too kiddie with Jar Jar Binks, whether it's the robotic acting that a lot of people felt with Hayden Christensen, it wasn't as well revered. And then this is a series, to me, this trilogy had moments. There was a lot of moments. I wouldn't say overall, story-wise, everything that dealt with, everything throughout the entire show or movies was like a consistent, like the original trilogy. I felt that in this trilogy, or the mid trilogy, the first, second, and third movie, there was moments like whether we got to see Yoda fight, or whether we got to see Grievous do his thing, or whether we got to see the pod racing, or we got to see Obi-Wan and Vader fight, or Obi-Wan and Anakin fight. Like those are the moments that kind of really hit you. But as far as like the overall like feel of the trilogy itself, I wasn't as much of a fan.
Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that disappoint me a little bit of the 1, 2, and 3 is the fact that some of the characters were a little underwhelming. Some of the characters to me didn't really get utilized. Like General Grievous, I feel like that he didn't get utilized very well. The fact that you have to watch the cartoons to see what he could really do, I think it was a missed opportunity for that. I think Mace Windu was underwhelming. I think that he was just there as someone that stood out of the only Jedi with a purple lightsaber. So that kind of symbolized like, oh, this guy's a badass. What makes him so special? But he didn't really he didn't get really utilized very well. Even from Anakin, he was very underwhelming at the very beginning. End up too much of the romance and not enough of the action. And like you said, there were moments like the Darth Maul fight with Obi-Wan and I forgot.
Qui-Gon.
Yeah, Qui-Gon, and that fight was awesome. But the problem with Vietnam is that all this stuff was happening towards the end of the movie per se, and that's all you were waiting for. You were way more of the saber fights because it got boring on some of the other stuff. You were like,
it was very political.
Yeah, and it was a little bit too much. Like it was you got a lot of I get it moments. Like I get it. Okay, someone's behind the scenes. I get it. This is happening. And so with that, we're like, well, can we get a better balance of this and more more fights and whatnot? I would even argue that Obi-Wan was a little underwhelming at the beginning of this stuff until maybe close to well, actually, he was underwhelming in the second movie more than in the first movie because he was still learning. But in the Revenge of the Sith, he got more of a going, got his way, getting better. But overall, like I said, I think all the characters really just became overwhelming, and it was too much of, like you said, really too political and not enough of what makes these characters stand out more. I mean, hell, Boba Fett's father was there, and he didn't really get a big spotlight either. So yeah, that was the most kind of disappointing of that series of movies.
And to go on from there, we were thinking, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, but you could see the progressive deterioration of the series. You were just kind of like, all right, Lucas probably needs to let it go. And, we need another fresh perspective on things. We want to see somebody else do it, that they can bring something, like bring the fan service to it to a like maximum. And Disney came in and bought the rights to Star Wars for billions of dollars. And I want to say the excitement for me as a very casual guy, like I'm thinking to myself, oh, cool. Maybe they're going to be able to take this and just run with it, right? Because they did such a good job with the Marvel series that you're thinking to yourself, that's exactly what Jeremy was saying. It's like you expected more from the saber fights because in this time and place, saber fights, the special effects are just beyond crazy. Like now, even in the early 2000s, like we were expecting like great fights, great special effects, and a decent story. And we wanted to see how Vader was. And unfortunately, we didn't get that, at least for the next series. The only thing was, to me, there was so much excitement. I don't know if it was more of the expectations that I had for the new trilogy, you know, Force Awakens, so on and so forth, that I had such high expectations, or if it just wasn't that good. And I look at it now and I think about it, and it's hard to argue this, but it just felt like it didn't know where it wanted to go.
I absolutely agree. At first, when I felt like with the George Lucas 1, 2, and 3, I felt like that series had, that particular trilogy had identity crisis. But no, it was this one that had identity crisis. Like you said, it didn't know where it wanted to be or where it wanted to go. And the funny part about that, right, is when the first like 4, 5, and 6 came out, you realize that, you know, they had several different directors come and do these movies. And then George Lucas decided to do 1, 2, and 3 on his own. And then here we are again, kind of trying to redo 4, 5, and 6 as like, let's get some different directors. And yet it felt like none of the directors were really communicating of where they left off and what should they do. It's more of like everybody's trying to do their own thing and just hopefully it'll all pace together, which to me, it was a big failure for this series. And I think it actually, some of it hurt some of the characters that could have been iconic to me personally. So.
No, and I completely agree with you. I think that was the biggest thing. When it came to A Force Awakens, for me, just generally speaking, like the introduction to Rey was such like a breath of fresh air to me. Like a strong female lead, someone who seemingly came out of nowhere, who was very like, you know, who had to learn, who was going to learn. And I thought Rey was such a good character in this movie that I was so excited to see her journey. And I had mixed feelings when it came to, by the way, we might say some spoilers here. So spoiler alert. I had mixed feelings on whether I felt that she should have been a descendant of somebody from, you know, a very strong Jedi, whether it was, you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi or a Skywalker or Palpatine or or whatever. But I wanted to see her journey, and I really liked her as a character. And it was interesting seeing Finn too as well, someone who was a stormtrooper who converted out from being a stormtrooper to actually being someone that fought for the good side. And Kylo Ren was an interesting character, Ben Solo. They had so many good characters, and yes, the very first one, Force Awakens, was very much a rehash of A New Hope. But I think there was a lot of promise. The thing is that, yeah, because of the lack of communication or just lack of a roadmap for them to go, hey, here's the hot spots of where we want the story to go. It just felt so off because Rian Johnson took the next movie, whether you loved it or you hated it, in which for me, I did dislike the movie. And I'll say that because if there's something about the movie that you generally don't like overall, you start nitpicking or being very hyper critical about it. And I got really hypercritical, and I'll be one to fully admit that Because there's a lot of people that will tell you, oh, it's a masterpiece. But to me, it just didn't work. Like the story didn't go from the first to the second. It took risk out of nowhere to me. Like it just didn't flow. It was like, here's one thing. This is what we're going to get. And then it just went completely opposite. And it just felt so jangled up and like messed. Like it just felt so jangled up and unorganized that the overall series to me just was such a big disappointment.
Yeah, I think what the biggest disappointment for me for those movies is the fact that one, I was very disappointed what they did with the villains, because I'm a big villain person. I think the villains is the ones that make the movie, in my opinion, because you got to have a good villain to have a good hero, to have a good clash, to have a good movie. And the villains were there, but because of the identity crisis, a lot of characters that I was excited for kind of just got kind of like shafted, you know, from you know, for instance, like Snoke, I believe that's his name. I'm sorry, it's been a long time since. Yeah, Snoke, right. I was very excited about. I thought, here's a new guy. He's going to be really cool, and the fact that when we watched the second movie that Rian Johnson directed, the part which is one of my favorite scenes. At first, it was one of my favorite scenes, but it was the Red Room scene where we saw Snoke and we find out all this stuff, and it was a very intense moment. But then find out, you know, that he died instantly, and you know, for no reason. Which I think it was the way he died. I think it was more disappointing that he died over the most simplest thing instead of like something very complicated. But whatever. That disappointment, and then you could just see that certain characters that were so mysterious never got that spotlight. They just got killed without really any reason to really shine. And then the other problem with the movies is that with the two directors kind of clashing, you had one director that wanted to keep kind of faithful to what made Star Wars what it was, to a guy that wanted to do risk taking and take it to a different direction, which I'm down for a risk and new direction. That's cool. Let's do something with that. But if the next director doesn't want to do that, then I feel like the risk taking that the second director did was kind of just went out the window, because now you have this director that has to find some way to bring back the classic thing. For instance, like Palpatine. Like Palpatine to me should never came back, but it is what it is. But this trilogy overall was just such a disappointment because the villains and the characters just didn't get a chance to really flare. And next time for them, I hope that, like you mentioned before, off air a long time ago, is next time, make sure you have a roadmap and make sure that these people kind of stick with that roadmap, but also add their own, you know, taste to it. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, granted, there's only two directors in the Disney trilogy. It was J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, and I agree. The contrast between the first two of the trilogy is really kind of what did it in. Like, because there was such a big backlash on Rian Johnson's vision from fans. Let's just say that critically, it was loved, but from a lot of fans, the Rian Johnson movie was not something that they liked. There was such a critical backlash for it that they had to bring J.J. Abrams back, and he basically rehashed the third one as well, putting elements that are very familiar. Now, that's nice and all, but come on, like, you can do some fan service, but you don't have to do that much fan service. Mm-hmm. Then I think there's that forced relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey that kind of, it wasn't necessary. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't necessary to me.